of course, she says plan for the worst, and that's what I've done. I'd be turning myself in about 15 minutes here at 9 o'clock into the sheriff's department. So I will be spending at least one more day, part of a day in jail.
Will the BC father who was imprisoned after speaking out about the medical transitioning of his child without his consent be sent back to jail today? I'm Drea Humphrey reporting from Rebel News to let you know what happens in the Court of Appeal about that case. Many of you are aware of the unprecedented case referred to as AB versus CD. That is the case of a BC father who pled guilty for contempt of court in order to inform you, the public, about the struggles he's had as a parent to speak out about the medical transitioning of his child without his consent. The father was muzzled by publication ban after publication ban that made it illegal for him to freely tell his side of his own child's medical transition story. At one point, the courts even forbade him from using biologically correct terms to describe his own child's gender, equating doing so to being family violence. The publication bans that are still in place are hard for journalists like myself to cover. At one point, Rebel News even hired a prestigious lawyer named Kyle Bienvenu from a Vancouver law firm called Hira Rowan. We actually won part of the case that set out to make the publication bans more easy to understand so that we could bring you what coverage we could of this important story. After pleading guilty in 2021, a Justice Michael Taman sentenced that father to a stiff penalty of 6 months in prison and ordered him to pay $30,000 to Ronald McDonald House charity. That father said he did not have the money for that, and after serving 2 months of that time, was released on bail. But his legal troubles were not over. He was back and forth into the courthouse behind me with the threat of jail time looming over his head every step of the way. Today, he will be in this court, and we will be hearing the ruling of 3 justices who heard his appeal hearing back in June about whether or not he will be sentenced back to prison. For those of you who didn't see my previous report on that, his counsel from Johnson Doyle argued in that appeal hearing that took place in June that the father had insufficient counsel, and also that the sentence of 6 months and paying a $30,000 fine was too stiff. So only time will tell whether or not the 3 justices agree. I'm going to catch up with the father before he goes in and surrenders himself to the sheriffs yet again to await his fate. All right, CD, it's just a few minutes before you have to go and surrender yourself. Last time we spoke to you, you were feeling optimistic. You felt that your counsel did a pretty good job. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, no, my counsel, again, I spoke with her earlier or late last week, and she had that same feeling. She's like, she's feeling good. They know they did a good job. Of course, she says plan for the worst, and that's what I've done. I'd be turning myself in about 15 minutes here at 9 o'clock into the sheriff's department. So I will be spending at least one more day, part of a day in jail. But hopefully this is the end of it. And hopefully the Court of Appeal agrees that the 6-month sentence was too long. And of course, there were arguments that were made during the appeal hearing concerning, ineffective counsel and a plea deal that got, essentially botched from a year and a half ago. And so yeah, we're going to find out. So I'm trying to feel good, but again, it's there's a very political side to this whole thing, and so it doesn't sometimes even matter how well the government does. If it's political, they just need to show up. And so I'm going to be optimistic and hope that's not the case, and that these three judges do what I consider to be the right thing, which is say, hey, because as they pointed out, I'm credited for 69 days. That's, I think, more than plenty for a first-time offense, anyways. But again, yeah, they could either let me out, or they could give me the worst case scenario, which is say we're going to enforce the sentence in its entirety. I go back. I go to jail now, turn myself in, and I don't come back out for 4 more months. And then I'm still stuck with that $30,000 fine too, which people may forget was also tacked on to it. So I'm going to feel optimistic. I guess the longer I'm in jail today, I might get a free lunch.
Now, if you end up back in jail, what about that are you dreading the most? And if you don't, if you get to walk away, what are you looking forward to the most?
Well, nobody wants. if you haven't been there, you don't know, but I'm sure you have an idea. Jail isn't fun. I mean, where I'm going today, for example, where I'm going to start out my day in about 15 minutes, is a brightly painted yellow cell with white fluorescent lights and no bedding or anything. You just it's concrete, and yeah, it's just and no access to looking out. I mean, you can kind of look out the window across at another cell, but I mean, no concept of time, anything. So you just sit in there and you try and sleep, but how do you do that when it's concrete, right? So yeah, there's nothing much fun. It's head banging stuff. It really is. I mean, when I was in jail before, it was literally a couple of months of solitary confinement. And yeah, I came out of there with, yeah, it's definitely some mental stuff to work through after you spend some time in that kind of environment. So what I'm looking forward to is maybe retiring from all of that and moving on and just getting my life back together, to whatever extent I can do that from everything that's kind of unraveled in 5 years. I mean, I'm not where I was 5 years ago in so many different ways. So it's taken a toll, but I'm optimistic. I got a message out. It was contempt of court to do it. But how many kids hopefully benefited? How many changes are we seeing around the United States? These states passing stuff, to prevent, these children from being sterilized and mutilated. And I'm seeing protests in Canada. I know you are very familiar with what's happening here because you go to so many of them. But that, I think you would even admit that you weren't seeing as much of that until recently either. Like a lot of these are new to see. Even Canadians here in Vancouver especially go out and say, hey, enough of this stuff with our kids. I mean, these are changes that are taking place that you didn't see 5 years ago. So, I mean, it's a price. I said, I remember in an interview I did when I was here the last time before I went to turn myself in, not meaning the court of appeal, but that time when I did turn myself into prison and was there for 2 months. I remember saying in some interviews, I was facing 5 years. I didn't think it was going to be that. Obviously, it wasn't. I still didn't think it was going to be 6 months either, mind you. But I remember saying back then, they give me the sentence, whatever it was, and at that time I didn't know that it was going to be 6 months, obviously. But these kids have a lifetime sentence with what they've done, and like my child, for example. I mean, they've got to face this for the rest of their life, and so many of these kids. And so I'm glad to see that even my time in jail spent back then, turned a lot of heads with that too. And how many lives have we possibly potentially spared from a life of transitioning?
Well, it's a good question, and thanks for sharing some of your last few minutes, at least today, before going into custody with Rebel News. Yeah,
well, hopefully I'm out again today, so hopefully you'll hear one more thing from me yet before, not in 4 months, but we'll see how it all goes. But and you'll all know before me. I'll be in my little solitary confinement cell, and you'll be in the courtroom getting to hear the verdict, and I'll be waiting with bated breath.
Any quick advice for any parents who are feeling helpless about their child being medically transitioned, although they don't think it's a good idea?
Yeah, it's a tough one to be in. I mean, this is partly where this precedent is. I mean, do people want to go through what I went through to do? And of course, even now, if I win my appeal, I've essentially gone from a 6 month, $30,000 fine and to a hopefully best case scenario of the 69 days, as they pointed out before. But that's still a daunting precedent for parents. So I mean, just it's tough. I mean, and there's not a lot of support groups for. It's growing, I think. And this is stuff I hope more parents that are doing what I've done, and there's many of us that you can lean on us, because the left is going to take you in and tell you, hey, it's better to have a live girl than a dead boy or something, and they'll convince you that you're doing the right thing and just pretend it's like a funeral. But just find resources, people that you can go to that can help you through it, because unfortunately I wish I could say you can stop it. But of course, I'm proof that the government under the Infants Act is going to do whatever they want. You can't stop it. In terms of preventative stuff, maybe take a look at alternative schooling. Get your kids out of the public schools. There's other schools that are, other options. Homeschooling. I know not everyone can afford it, but there's other options that are not homeschooling that are being brought in some way specifically for this reason, because of what's happening to kids. And they're saying, hey, we need something else. So. But those are more before it gets to the point. But yeah, once they get to that point and the government's got them, you can try and dissuade them. My last time in the Court of Appeal, they did say I had that right. So don't be told that you can't. You can only affirm it's not true, as much as they'll tell you that. But yeah, just try and see the signs as early as you can, and if you can do some kind of an intervention, yeah, just look for people to lean on.
All right, so I went in there. I was with the father. There were some other people there. Really no mainstream media. There was one other independent journalist named Dan Dix from Press for Truth, but it was mainly supporters, some familiar faces that we've seen before. The father surrendered himself to the sheriffs. He says he's going into that yellow room that you heard. He surrendered a backpack, a wallet, a cell phone, and a rosary, waiting to hear what his fate is. I'm going to run into the courthouse and hear what the ruling is. And you, my friends, will be the first to know when I get back. Well, it's official. It appears that the long 5 years of legal troubles for this father have finally come to an end. The verdict was just read very quickly inside by a very soft-spoken justice that many couldn't actually hear in the gallery. But what we could hear is that this father's sentence has been amended to time served. And also, they have ordered that his fine that he owed of $30,000 to Ronald McDonald House, $30,000 that Justice Michael Taman said could come from a crowdfunding site that was designed to help for his legal fees, no longer has to be paid. Now, something was said about probation. I actually couldn't hear it, nor could anyone that I talked to after when we got outside of the gallery, but they will be linking their full reasoning. Again, it was just literally the verdict inside. So the full reasoning will be linked to the Court of Appeals site. But guess what? I already have it linked for you now, the power of time that passes during editing. So right now in the description box below, if you link on that article, you will be able to access the full decision reading. But don't do that yet, because right now I'm going to cut to the father himself.
Yeah, no, we got I call it a huge win. I mean, we couldn't have, done better today than what we got. I mean, time served, so I'm not going back to jail. Any time remaining on the 6-month sentence is gone. And the big $30,000 fine to Ronald McDonald House, taken away. So, yeah, I walk out of here with everything behind me on this Court of Appeal hearing. So, it's great news, and I think it's a big win for parents. I mean, we're going out on a big high note here because it's been a lot of losses. I mean, sure, we've gotten a lot of word out because of the fact, of the attention the story has generated over the last 5 years, but sometimes it was in part because of the spectacular losses that I was getting, and today to finally get a really big win and to end on a high note, I hope that encourages people, especially here in Canada, where it seems like things aren't moving very fast as you sometimes see in the United States, but. I think the tide is turning, and I'm not going to say that is exactly why these 3 judges did what they did, but I hope this encourages other parents to realize, that I got through this, and it was they tried to hit me pretty hard, and I came out here, and big win today in the BC Court of Appeal. So here I am outside. I was in jail my last hopefully few hours in jail, and I'm back out, and here I am talking to Rebel News.
Yeah, you're out. And so what about probation? What do we know about that?
I don't know too much about probation. What I heard is that people in the courtroom had said that the judge had mentioned probation. When I was released out of the jail by the sheriffs earlier, like about an hour ago, I asked them about that because I had come to hear something of that. And they said they weren't aware of anything to do with probation. There was, in fact, nothing for me to sign. They said, you're a free person. And they said, here you go. And I thanked the sheriffs. I said, you guys have treated me well over the last 5 years. It's been chaotic, even without the jail stuff. I said, some of the crowds we've had in here and the corrections officers, I said, you guys are all did a wonderful job. And even my understanding is that some of the sheriffs even kind of high-fived over this decision. They were happy to see me get a win, too. I'd been, kind of an indirect part of this whole thing, too. So I think they were kind of like happy to say, hey, Rob, nice to see you go, and it's over.
Well, what is going to be the first thing that you do now that you can breathe a little bit and you're a free man?
Yeah, just go back to a normal life, back to Canada Post. I mean, I have been there, but hopefully, just kind of get back in the rhythm, which I kind of was in, not knowing what was going to happen here, of course. But just get back into a bit of a regular pattern and a rhythm. I mean, my immediate thing today is I'm just going to check to see how I get my passport back, because obviously I should be allowed, my travel visas back. So that's something that I want to make sure I figure out how to do that. Just for the rest, just kind of enjoying the fact that it's over a little bit. So just kind of hanging out with some people here, and just kind of sort of celebrating, a big win.
Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thank you, Drea.
Unlike the state-preferred media that was nowhere to be seen today to cover this very important case on parental rights, Rebel News had our boots on the ground once again. We've covered this story like no other outlet every step of the way. If you appreciate the work that we do to bring you and the rest of the public the other side of the story, please consider helping to support the many costs involved in our journalism. You can do so by heading to rebelnews.com and clicking on donate. We appreciate your support.